Chloe, a cutthroat modern-day public relations executive, gets hit by a rogue delivery truck and wakes up in the body of An Mingyu, the universally despised villainess of a trashy historical romance novel set in ancient China. Mingyu is destined to be executed at the Meridian Gate in exactly 6 months for her crimes against the Empire's beloved heroine. Unwilling to accept a doomed fate, Chloe treats her impending execution like a massive corporate scandal. She launches an aggressive, dynasty-wide PR campaign to completely rebrand her image, dragging the stoic and terrifying General Zhao, the god of war, and her supposed executioner, into a fake dating scheme to serve as her primary brand ambassador. Along the way, fake feelings turn very real, and the imperial court learns the terrifying power of good marketing. They say love is unpredictable, and today's story proves it. Welcome to Romance Crave Stories, where every episode is full of passion, secrets, and emotional twists. Let's begin. Waking up on a carved mahogany bed draped in layers of heavy, embroidered crimson silk was my first clue that my Tuesday morning spin class in Lagos was definitely cancelled. My second clue was the frantic servant girl cowering in the corner, holding a jade tray of lotus pastries like a protective shield. "Please, esteemed consort, and do not throw the porcelain today," she whimpered, her forehead pressed firmly to the floorboards. I blinked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Esteemed consortin? I was Chloe, a senior public relations manager, whose biggest crisis this week was a celebrity client tweeting a wildly inappropriate opinion about vegan leather. But as I caught sight of myself in the polished bronze mirror, spiteful arched eyebrows, cascading raven hair secured with heavy gold hairpins, and a scowl that could curdle soy milk, the horrifying realization hit me like a rogue delivery truck. I had transmigrated into The Emperor's Radiant Lotus, a deliciously trashy web novel I'd read on my daily commute. And I wasn't the Radiant Lotus. I was An Mingyu, the venomous villainess destined to be executed at the Meridian Gate in exactly 6 months for pushing the heroine into a koi pond and attempting to poison the crown prince. My approval rating in this empire was practically in the negative digits. The imperial court hated my arrogance, the commoners hated my family's exorbitant taxes, and my fiancé, the crown prince, was already making heart eyes at the heroine, a lowly minister's daughter with the personality of wet rice paper. Naturally, I panicked. For about 3 minutes. Then the crisis management instincts kicked in. I am a PR professional. I have resurrected the careers of politicians caught embezzling and pop stars caught lip-syncing. A little light treason and bullying? Please. That's just a Tuesday in the corporate world. I didn't need martial arts, a legendary sword, or the power of friendship. I needed a complete, top-down brand overhaul. "Little maid," I said, pointing a manicured finger boasting a terrifyingly long silver nail guard. "What is your name?" "BBU, your ladyship," she squeaked. "BU, put down the pastries and fetch me some rice paper and an ink brush. We are holding a press conference." My survival strategy was simple. Pivot the narrative. I would rebrand An Mingyu from bloodthirsty tyrant to misunderstood philanthropist with a heart of gold. Step 1. Apologize publicly and loudly. Step 2. Launch a charitable foundation. Step 3. Find a high-profile, universally beloved figure to associate my brand with. That figure, unfortunately, was General Zhao, the stoic, terrifyingly competent god of war, and the man originally contracted to order my execution. He was notoriously immune to bribes, threats, and feminine wiles. But I wasn't going to offer him any of those. I was going to offer him a strategic partnership with a massive return on investment. Watch out, Imperial Court. The villainess is staging a glorious comeback, and she's bringing a perfectly tailored media strategy with her. Chapter 1. BU, absolutely not. Burn it. I pointed a trembling finger at the monstrosity of a gown my maid was holding. It was a violently bright crimson silk robe, heavily embroidered with golden phoenixes that looked like they were screaming. It screamed evil stepmother, it screamed narcissist, and most importantly, it screamed terrible PR. "Be but esteemed consort," BU stammered, dropping to her knees for what felt like the dozenth time this morning. "This is your favorite gown. You wore it when you pushed Minister Wang's daughter into the mud." "Exactly my point," I sighed, rubbing my temples. The headache of transmigrating into a doomed villainess was only compounded by her atrocious, aggressive wardrobe. Optics, BU. Today is all about optics. If I am going to publicly apologize for being a tyrant, I cannot dress like a blood-soaked warlord. I need soft. I need minimalist. I need approachability. I marched over to the massive cedarwood armoire, and started throwing out dark purples and harsh blacks. Finally, I found it. A simple, elegant combination of blush pink silk paired with a cream overcoat, subtly accented with sage green embroidery around the cuffs. This, I declared, tossing it to the bewildered maid. I will wear this. Minimal makeup, no sharp hairpins, and for the love of the heavens, do not paint my lips red. We are going for an innocent lotus-seeking redemption aesthetic. An hour later, stripped of my terrifying silver nail guards and dressed in pastel, non-threatening colors, I stood behind a makeshift wooden podium in the center of the bustling Eastern Market. I had tipped 3 local town criers a small fortune in silver tails to act as my hype men. They had spent the last 30 minutes banging gongs and yelling about a historic announcement, drawing a massive, highly suspicious crowd of commoners, merchants, and off-duty imperial guards. A hush fell over the square as I stepped up. The peasants stared at me with a mixture of awe and sheer terror. A woman in the front row protectively clutched a cabbage to her chest. I took a deep breath. In my past life, I had stood before ruthless journalists to defend a tech CEO who accidentally funded a cult. A bunch of ancient commoners and cabbage-clutching aunties should be a breeze. I picked up the large, polished brass cone I'd bullied a local blacksmith into hammering out for me that morning. It wasn't exactly a microphone, but it would do. Citizens of the capital. Stakeholders of the empire. I shouted through the brass megaphone. My voice echoed across the cobblestones. Thank you for gathering on such short notice. I and Mingyu, daughter of the Prime Minister, have called this press conference, or public assembly, to address recent controversies regarding my brand. My character. The crowd exchanged utterly baffled looks. I recognize that in the past, my actions have not aligned with the core values of the Yin family, nor the harmonious vision of our great emperor. I continued, seamlessly slipping into corporate apology mode. I have made mistakes. Pushing Miss Lin into the koi pond was a momentary lapse in judgment, and a severe breach of protocol. It was not a reflection of who I am, but rather a toxic byproduct of a highly stressful court environment. A man in the back whispered loudly, "Did she just say toxic byproduct?" Moving forward, I boomed, ignoring him. I am committed to transparency, synergy, and giving back to the community. Effective immediately, I am launching a comprehensive restructuring of my public presence. I will be instituting a zero-tolerance policy for bullying, tea poisoning, and general villainy within my household. I lowered the megaphone and offered the crowd a practiced, soft smile. The one I'd rehearsed in the bronze mirror to ensure my resting villain face didn't accidentally look like I was plotting murder. I bowed deeply, a gesture so shocking for a noblewoman of my rank that 3 people genuinely gasped. Thank you for your time. I will not be taking questions. Have a productive day. I turned on my heel and descended the platform, my blush and sage skirt sweeping gracefully behind me. Bu trailed after me, her mouth hanging open. Esteemed consort, she whispered frantically as we climbed into my palanquin. What did you just do? Half the people think you have been possessed by a fox spirit, and the other half think you're plotting a rebellion. Let them think what they want, Bu, I said, leaning back against the silk cushions and mentally checking public apology off my to-do list. We've successfully disrupted the narrative. Now the real work begins. Unbeknownst to me, perched on the tiled roof of a nearby tea house, a shadow guard dressed in midnight blue lowered his gaze. He vanished into thin air, sprinting back to the military encampment to report to General Zhao that the Prime Minister's psychotic daughter had completely lost her mind and was currently terrifying the peasants with words like synergy. Chapter 2. The secret to any successful crisis management campaign is getting ahead of the story. If you know a scandal is going to break, you don't wait for the tabloids to print it. You leak it yourself on a Friday afternoon with a perfectly crafted spin. According to the Emperor's Radiant Lotus, His Highness, Crown Prince Li Wei, was scheduled to dramatically annul our betrothal at the upcoming mid-autumn banquet. He would stand before the entire imperial court, denounce my wicked ways, and declare his undying love for the heroine, Miss Lin. It was designed to be my ultimate humiliation, a social execution before my actual, physical execution. I dipped a sable hairbrush into a pool of freshly ground ink. Not on my watch, Your Highness. Bu more ink, I murmured, my eyes scanning the heavy scroll of premium rice paper spread across my mahogany desk. And light some sandalwood. We need a serene, spiritually enlightened atmosphere for this. I was drafting a petition to the Emperor. It was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, seamlessly blended with the flowery, poetic prose of the ancient court. I wrote of my deep, Soul-searching reflections following my recent public apology. I expressed profound regret that my karmic energy was currently incompatible with the rigorous demands of the inner palace. Therefore, out of my overwhelming respect for the Crown Prince and the stability of the empire, I was selflessly requesting to dissolve our engagement, so I could pursue a journey of inner peace and spiritual wellness. It was the dynastic equivalent of "it's not you, it's me," wrapped in a legally binding bow. Just as I stamped my personal seal at the bottom of the scroll, the heavy wooden doors of my courtyard banged open. "And Mingyu," a voice bellowed. I didn't flinch. I carefully set my seal down and looked up to see Crown Prince Li Wei storming into my study. He was undeniably handsome, in that pampered, polished sort of way, draped in gold-embroidered dragon silks, his jaw clenched in righteous fury. In the original novel, his dramatic flair was portrayed as passionate and heroic. To my seasoned PR eyes, he just looked like a liability who desperately needed media training. "Your Highness," I said smoothly, remaining seated but gesturing to an intricately carved chair across from me. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Please have a seat." "Bu, pour the prince some chamomile tea. He looks stressed." Li Wei stopped dead in his tracks, staring at me as if I had suddenly sprouted a second head. He had clearly come prepared for a screaming match. The original Mingyu would have thrown a vase by now, wept hysterically, and clung to his boots. "I will not sit," he snapped, recovering his haughty posture. "What was that ridiculous spectacle in the market yesterday? Synergy? Toxic byproducts? Have you completely lost your mind? If this is another one of your pathetic ploys to get my attention away from Lady Lin." "Actually," I interrupted, picking up the freshly stamped scroll and extending it toward him with both hands, "I'm glad you're here. It saves me the cost of a courier. I am executing a strategic pivot, Your Highness. This is for you to co-sign." He snatched the scroll, his brow furrowing as his eyes darted over the elegant calligraphy. For a long moment, the study was dead silent, save for the soft bubbling of the tea kettle. I watched his face cycle through a fascinating spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a deep, offended shade of puce. "You." His voice pitched up an octave. "You are breaking our betrothal." I prefer the term mutually stepping back to pursue individual growth, but yes, I replied, folding my hands neatly on the desk. "I've realized our brands simply do not align. You need a gentle, unproblematic consort like Miss Lin to soften your public image. I need time to rehabilitate my devastatingly low approval ratings. It's a win-win." "You cannot dump me," Li Wei exploded, slamming the scroll onto the desk. "I am the Crown Prince. I was going to dump you at the Mid-Autumn banquet. I had a whole speech prepared. And I'm saving you the breath," I said with a sympathetic, entirely professional smile. "Think of the optics, Your Highness. If you break it off, you look cruel for abandoning your childhood fiancé. If I fall on my sword and step away for my spiritual health, you look like a tragic, honorable figure respecting my wishes. You're welcome." He opened his mouth, closed it, and pointed a shaking finger at me. He was completely derailed. He had come here for a dramatic, emotionally charged confrontation, and I was treating him like an HR exit interview. "I am taking this to the Emperor," Li Wei hissed, grabbing the scroll. "Do not think you can play games with me, Mingyu. When this is finalized, you will have nothing. Please ensure His Majesty notes my deep respect when you deliver it." I called out cheerfully as he spun on his heel and stormed out, looking far more upset than a man who had just gotten exactly what he wanted. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a long breath. Step 2 complete. The ex-fiancé was neutralized, and the narrative was entirely under my control. Now, I just needed to secure my new brand ambassador. It was time to draft a pitch for the terrifying god of war. Chapter 3. The estate of General Zhao, the empire's dreaded god of war, did not have a welcoming aesthetic. There were no weeping willows, no decorative koi ponds, and certainly no pavilions designed for poetry reading. Instead, the courtyard was a vast expanse of packed dirt, currently occupied by 36 heavily armored soldiers engaged in brutal, terrifyingly efficient sparring. "Esteemed consort," Bu squeaked from behind me, hiding entirely within my shadow. "They look like they eat people. Can we please go home?" "Posture, Bu," I muttered, adjusting the sleeves of my understated indigo dress. "Confidence is key when pitching to a high-net-worth client. We aren't here to be eaten. We're here for a B2B merger." I stepped forward, completely ignoring the massive guard who raised a halberd to block my path. "And Mingyu, daughter of the Prime Minister, I announced crisply. I have a 2 o'clock appointment with the general. The guard stared at me, bewildered by the concept of a 2 o'clock appointment, but my commanding, unbothered tone, honed by years of bypassing terrible receptionists at Fortune 500 companies, worked. 10 minutes later, I was escorted into a stark, unadorned study that smelled of ink, sandalwood, and sharpened steel. Sitting behind a massive ebony desk was General Zhao. The web novel had described him as a demon on the battlefield and a glacier in the court. But seeing him in person was an entirely different experience. He was devastatingly handsome, but in a sharp, predatory way. His jawline could cut glass, his dark eyes were cold enough to freeze boiling water, and a faint, thin scar crossed his left eyebrow, adding to his rugged, terrifying appeal. He looked up from his military reports, his expression completely blank. In my past life, I would have put him on the cover of GQ in a heartbeat. In this life, he was the man destined to order my beheading in less than 6 months. I didn't let that deter me. I offered a polite, shallow bow and took the seat opposite him without waiting for an invitation. Ladian, his voice was a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. I admit, when my scouts reported that you requested an audience, I assumed it was a trap. You are a long way from the palace. General Zhao, thank you for fitting me into your schedule, I said smoothly. I gestured for Bu, who crept forward, practically weeping in terror, to place a thick bamboo scroll on the desk between us. I know you are a man who appreciates efficiency, so I will skip the pleasantries. I am here to offer you a strategic partnership. Zhao raised a single dark eyebrow. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his broad chest. A partnership with the woman who pushed the Prime Minister's guest into a pond last week. A PR disaster that I am currently actively managing. I corrected without missing a beat. But let's talk about your PR, General. You have a massive branding issue. For the first time, a flicker of something, amusement, irritation, crossed his stoic face. I am the commander of the Northern Army. I do not have branding. Exactly the problem, I said, untying the silk ribbon and unrolling my bamboo pitch deck. I had spent half the night painting meticulous charts. Look at these metrics. Your military faction boasts a 100% success rate in border defense, yet your domestic approval rating is abysmal. The commoners are terrified of your soldiers. Rumors circulate that your men drink the blood of their enemies. Parents use your name to frighten their children into eating their vegetables. Zhao stared at the pie chart I was pointing to. My men do not drink blood. And fear ensures order. Fear is a volatile currency, I countered, tapping the desk. It leads to low recruitment rates, decreased funding from the imperial treasury, and political isolation. You need a softer image. You need approachability. You need to show the empire that the Northern Army protects them, not threatens them. You need me. General Zhao let out a low, breathy sound that might have been a laugh. I need the most universally despised woman in the capital. I am undergoing a comprehensive rebrand, I stated confidently. And the best way to rehabilitate my image is to align myself with an honorable, unshakable pillar of the state, you. In return, I will leverage my resources, my family's wealth, and my undeniable talent for narrative manipulation to humanize you and your army. We engage in a highly publicized faux courtship. The room went dead silent. The guards by the door shifted uncomfortably. A fake courtship, Zhao repeated slowly, his dark eyes narrowing as he leaned forward, suddenly bringing his imposing presence much closer to mine. The sheer force of his aura was enough to make most seasoned politicians faint. I held his gaze, channeling the energy of a woman who had once stared down a furious billionaire during a stock crash. A strictly professional, mutually beneficial arrangement. We attend public events together. We exchange polite, thoroughly vetted correspondence. You provide me with a shield of credibility. I provide you with a softer, heroic narrative. Contract valid for 6 months. At which point we announce an amicable, tearful separation. No stringes, no actual romance, strictly deliverables. Zhao looked at me as if I were an entirely new species of creature he had just discovered on the battlefield. He looked at the charts, then back at my perfectly composed, professional smile. He reached across the desk, picking up his ink brush. You are entirely unhinged, Ladian, he murmured, a dangerous, fascinating smirk finally breaking through his glacial exterior. But your logistics are sound. He pressed his personal seal to the bottom of my bamboo contract. I accept your terms. Let us see how the capital responds to my new brand. Chapter 4. Remember, this is a safe space, I announced, pacing before the line of 6 trembling servants I had assembled in the plum blossom courtyard. Or rather, a circle of absolute imperial immunity. Nothing said in this feedback session will result in flogging, banishment, or a deduction in your monthly stipends. I want brutal, actionable honesty. The focus group consisted of BU, a gardener, 2 kitchen maids, a stable boy, and an elderly groundskeeper who looked like he might pass out from sheer terror. I had realized earlier that morning that if I was going to launch the reformed Mingyu campaign, I needed to understand my baseline metrics. You can't fix a brand if you don't know exactly why the target demographic hates it. Let's start with an icebreaker, I said, clapping my hands together. Every single servant flinched violently. I sighed. Olait, no sebreakers. Let's get straight to the constructive criticism. When you look at me, what is the first word that comes to mind? Kitchen maid number 1 go. The young girl squeezed her eyes shut. And mercy. That is a plea, not an adjective. Try again. Terrifying, your ladyship, she blurted out, throwing herself into a kowtow. Good. Valid data point. I nodded, gesturing for her to stand up. Gardener? What about you? What specifically makes me terrifying? The gardener swallowed hard, keeping his eyes firmly fixed on the hem of my pale yellow skirt. It is your ladyship's face. Even when you are not actively throwing a teapot, your eyes suggest you are calculating the dimensions of our shallow graves. Ah, I muttered, rubbing my chin. Resting villain face. I suspected as much. It's a chronic condition. In the corporate world, a severe resting face was an asset. It kept junior executives from asking stupid questions during board meetings. In the ancient imperial court, where women were expected to look like gentle, unbothered lotus flowers, it was a massive liability. Thank you for your transparency, I told the traumatized group. You may all go to the kitchens for an extra ration of pork buns. This session is adjourned. Once they scattered, I turned to the polished bronze mirror I had dragged out into the courtyard sunlight. I needed to practice looking approachable. I tried to lift the corners of my mouth, soften my brow, and project philanthropic warmth. Are you experiencing a medical emergency, Ladian? I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. General Zhao was standing in the arched moon gate of my courtyard. He was dressed in his dark, understated military robes, looking like a lethal shadow against the bright spring blossoms. I hadn't even heard him approach. General, I gasped, quickly composing myself. We had a strategy alignment meeting scheduled for tomorrow, did we not? I was passing by the estate and decided to deliver the revised security protocols for our upcoming public appearances myself, he said, holding up a bound leather scroll. He stepped into the courtyard, his dark eyes sweeping over the bronze mirror, and then returning to my face. A faint, barely perceptible crease formed between his brows. But I ask again, are you in pain? Your face was contorting. I am not contorting, I am practicing my smile, I said defensively, crossing my arms. Zhao stared at me. That was a smile. It is a work in progress. I snapped, my carefully cultivated PR persona slipping for a second. My focus group just informed me that I look like I want to bury people. If our fake courtship is going to be believable, I need to look at you with warmth and affection. Not like I'm evaluating your neck for a guillotine. Zhao walked closer, stopping a few feet away. His sheer size and intense, grounding presence made the entire courtyard feel smaller. Show me this. Warmth and affection. I took a deep breath, channeled my inner Disney princess, and beamed at him. Zhao didn't flinch, but his eyes widened fractionally. That is deeply unsettling. You look as though you are baring your teeth before biting out my throat. Oh, come on. I dropped the smile with a huff. It cannot be that bad. Ladian, you are treating a smile like a military maneuver. You cannot force your facial muscles into submission. To my absolute shock, a low, genuine chuckle rumbled in his chest. It was a rich, warm sound that completely transformed his stoic face, softening the harsh lines and making the small scar over his eye crinkle. I stared at him, momentarily completely derailed. Oh no. The web novel had not adequately prepared me for the God of War's laugh. It was entirely too attractive. How are you doing that? I demanded, pointing an accusing finger at him. You're the terrifying general of the North. You aren't supposed to have a nice smile. I am not smiling for a crowd, Zhao replied, his amusement lingering in his dark eyes. I am smiling because you are inexplicably ridiculous. if you want to look approachable, stop trying to calculate the angle of your lips. Think of something that actually brings you joy, not a hostile takeover, or whatever it is you usually plot. Something that brings me joy, I muttered, turning back to the mirror. I closed my eyes. I didn't think about the impending execution, or the annoying crown prince, or the metrics of my brand. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated satisfaction I had felt when the crown prince stormed out of my study yesterday, thoroughly outplayed and outmaneuvered. I opened my eyes. A genuine, slightly wicked, but entirely unforced smile had settled on my face. I glanced over at Zhao in the mirror's reflection. The amusement had faded from his face, replaced by a sudden, intense stillness. He was watching me with a look I couldn't quite decipher, like I was a puzzle he suddenly, desperately wanted to solve. Better, he finally murmured, his voice dropping an octave. Keep that one for the cameras. There are no cameras in ancient China, General, I smirked, turning to face him. Whatever mechanism you use to spread your propaganda, Lady Anne, he replied smoothly, though his eyes never left mine. We are going to need it for the charity gala next week. Chapter 5. The Lotus Pavilion was, to use an industry term, a logistical nightmare. It was entirely open air, surrounded on three sides by the infamous koi pond where the original in Mingyu had attempted to drown the heroine. To host my inaugural charity gala at the scene of the crime was a high-risk, high-reward strategy. In PR we call it reclaiming the narrative. The imperial court called it shameless audacity. I stood at the top of the marble steps, orchestrating the final touches. I was draped in flowing layers of pale lavender and silver silk, ethereal, regretful, and expensive. Move those silk lanterns slightly to the left, I instructed a harried eunuch. We need ambient lighting, not an interrogation room. And ensure the vegan lotus pastries are prominently displayed near the entrance. By dusk, the pavilion was packed. The elite of the capital had turned out in droves, not out of a sudden passion for aquatic wildlife conservation, but out of morbid curiosity. They were hovering around the edges of the room like vultures waiting for a carcass, fully expecting me to snap and throw someone into the water. Then the murmurs rippled through the crowd, parting the sea of brightly colored silks. Miss Lin had arrived. The original novel's heroine looked exactly as a tragic protagonist should. Delicate, trembling, and dressed in pure white. She clutched a silk handkerchief to her chest, her doe eyes darting around the pavilion in absolute terror. The other noble ladies, sensing blood in the water, began to sneer and whisper behind their painted fans, preparing to ice her out on my behalf. It was time to execute the pivot. I signaled my hired musicians to play a soft, welcoming chord, and I glided across the polished wooden floor. The pavilion fell dead silent. You could hear a hairpin drop. Miss Lin saw me approaching and looked like she was about to faint directly into the nearest potted bamboo. Miss Lin, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the hushed room. I offered her a deep, respectful bow. Several nobles visibly gasped. Esteemed consortin, she whispered, curtsying so low she nearly swept the floor. I received your invitation. I did not wish to offend by refusing. Offend? Heavens. No. The Save the Koi initiative could not possibly commence without you, I said smoothly, taking her trembling hands in mine. I turned to face the gawking crowd. My lords and ladies, as you know, my past actions toward Miss Lin were a profound failure of character. But in my journey toward enlightenment, Miss Lin's boundless grace and unspoken dedication to aquatic safety have been an inspiration. Miss Lin blinked at me, utterly baffled by her sudden promotion to aquatic safety icon. Therefore, I declared, raising her hand like a victorious prize fighter, I have pledged 10,000 taels of silver in Miss Lin's name to clean the capital's canals, and I am honored to name her the guest of honor for tonight's gala. The sheer strategic brilliance of the move was intoxicating. By elevating her, I completely neutralized the conflict. The mean girls couldn't bully her without directly insulting my charity, and the crown prince, who was sulking near the wine tables, couldn't swoop in to rescue her, because she wasn't in danger. She was a co-chair. Hostile takeover averted. Brand synergy achieved. Miss Lin's terror slowly dissolved into bewildered gratitude. You are too generous, Lady Anne. Please call me Mingyu. I beamed, giving her a gentle pat. Before the court could fully process the whiplash of my behavior, the herald at the entrance struck a heavy iron gong, announcing General Zhao, commander of the Northern Army, god of war. The crowd didn't just part. They practically scrambled over each other to clear a 10-foot radius. Zhao stepped into the soft glow of the lanterns, and the collective breath of the pavilion hitched. He wasn't in his usual leather armor. Instead, he wore formal military robes of midnight blue and silver, broad-shouldered and devastatingly regal. The ceremonial sword at his hip was a stark reminder of his lethal reputation, but his eyes swept the room with absolute, terrifying calm until they landed on me. Our contract stated we needed to present a united front. He was executing his deliverables flawlessly. I excused myself from a dazed Miss Lin and walked toward him. He met me halfway, offering his arm with a fluid, practiced grace. As I slipped my hand resting lightly on his forearm, I could feel the solid, unyielding muscle beneath the silk. "You are late," I murmured, keeping my newly perfected, radiant smile fixed on my face for the audience. "I had to execute a traitor in the Western garrison," he replied softly, his face an impassive mask as he inclined his head toward a terrified minister of revenue. "But I made sure to clean the blood off my boots. Optics, as you say." I swallowed a laugh, leaning just a fraction closer to him. The scent of sandalwood, crisp night air, and cold steel surrounded him. "Well, your timing is impeccable. Look at them. They don't know whether to bow to us or run for their lives." Zhao's gaze drifted down to me, the harsh lines of his face softening just enough for the surrounding nobles to witness a miracle. The god of war looking at the capital's greatest villainess with something that dangerously resembled affection. "Let them wonder," his deep voice rumbled, placing his free hand over mine where it rested on his arm. His thumb brushed a slow, deliberate stroke across my knuckles, sending an entirely unscripted jolt of electricity up my arm. "The stage is yours, Mingyu. Lead the way." Chapter 6. In the public relations industry, we have a saying: it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. In the imperial court, it apparently takes less than that. It takes exactly 1 cup of oolong tea. I was attending a mid-morning poetry circle hosted by the Empress, a high-visibility networking event that was crucial for my third-quarter brand metrics. I was minding my own business, politely nodding at terrible haikus and sipping hot water, when Lady Wu, the daughter of the Minister of Rights, suddenly gasped, clutched her throat, and dramatically collapsed onto the silk rugs. Her teacup shattered. A dark, frothy liquid spilled across the floor. The pavilion erupted into chaos. Eunuchs shouted, noblewomen shrieked, and Lady Wu's personal maid pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "It was Consortin," the maid wailed, tears streaming down her face. "I saw her servant hovering near the tea pavilion. She has poisoned my lady just as she tried to poison the crown prince." The music stopped. The whispers instantly turned venomous. The nobles, who had been tentatively buying into my reformed Mingyu narrative, immediately snapped back to their original programming. Once a villainess, always a villainess. 2 imperial guards stepped forward, their hands resting on the pommels of their swords, looking at me expectantly. I didn't panic. I didn't weep or throw myself at the Empress's feet to beg for mercy. I simply set my teacup down, smoothed the skirts of my pale peach dress, and signaled for Biu. "Biu," I said calmly. "Bring me the ledger." Biu, who had thankfully stopped crying at every minor inconvenience and was slowly transforming into a highly efficient executive assistant, stepped forward and dropped a massive, heavily bound bamboo scroll onto a nearby mahogany table, with a resounding thud. "Your Majesty," I said, stepping into the center of the room and addressing the Empress. While I deeply sympathize with Lady Wu's sudden indigestion, I categorically deny these allegations. In fact, I welcome a full, transparent audit of today's events. "An audit?" the Empress repeated, bewildered. "A paper trail, Your Majesty," I explained, untying the ledger. "Ever since I committed myself to a path of absolute transparency, I instituted a strict supply chain management protocol within my household. I do not breathe without it being logged." I unrolled the scroll, tracing a manicured finger down the columns of meticulous calligraphy. Item 1 alibi. At the time the tea was being brewed, I was in the Western Corridor discussing silk tariffs with the Minister of Finance. I have his signed seal confirming our meeting. Item 2, servant tracking. Biu was indeed near the tea pavilion as logged here because she was fetching my personal thermos of hot water. We do not consume outside beverages due to strict dietary liabilities. The crowd stared in stunned silence as I pulled out a silver testing needle and walked over to the spilled oolong tea. I dipped it into the puddle. The needle remained perfectly silver. No poison. Item 3, the tea itself, I announced, holding up the clean needle. I suspect Lady Wu is not poisoned, but rather suffering from an allergic reaction. Did the kitchen perhaps use almond oil in the accompanying pastries? Lady Wu's severe almond allergy is a matter of public record. The pavilion was dead silent. Lady Wu, who was supposed to be dying, suddenly stopped groaning and opened one eye, looking highly embarrassed. Her maid turned pale. Enough. The single, low word cut through the pavilion like a whip crack. The crowd parted instantly as General Zhao strode into the room. He was in full military armor today, the dark iron plating absorbing the light. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He bypassed the Empress, bypassed the sputtering Lady Wu, and walked directly to my side. General, I whispered, slightly startled. This wasn't on our shared calendar. I heard there was a disturbance involving my fiancé, he replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent shivers down the spines of everyone in earshot. He turned his terrifying, glacial gaze upon Lady Wu and her maid. Falsely accusing the future matriarch of the Northern Army of attempted murder is a capital offense. Should I summon the interrogators, or would you like to confess your error now? The maid immediately threw herself to the floor, weeping and admitting that Lady Wu had merely eaten an almond cake and panicked, and they had seized the opportunity to blame me to elevate their own family's standing. Crisis averted. Brand integrity maintained. As the Empress ordered the guards to escort the disgraced Lady Wu away, Zhao turned to me. His hand instinctively reached out, his heavy, gauntlet fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. The touch was completely unnecessary for the crowd. It was intimate, protective, and entirely unscripted. Are you unharmed? He asked, his dark eyes searching my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. I handled it, General, I said, my voice suddenly a little breathless. It was just a minor PR hiccup. Zhao stared down at me, his jaw tightening. For the first time, the god of war looked slightly rattled. You handled it, he agreed softly, dropping his hand. But I found that I did not care about the optics, Mingyu. I only cared that they were threatening you. He stepped back, adjusting his sword belt, his stoic mask slamming firmly back into place. But as he escorted me out of the pavilion, leaving a stunned court in our wake, I realized the terrifying truth. The general was going off script. And worse, my own heart was racing in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with corporate strategy. Chapter 7. Bu, talk to me about the Q3 projections, I said, tapping my ink brush against the mahogany desk. How was the engagement on our latest merch drop? Bu, who was now fully leaning into her role as chief operations officer of my household, pushed a pair of spectacles up her nose and unrolled a ledger. Sold out, esteemed consort. The reformed Mingyu lotus-embroidered handkerchiefs evaporated in 3 hours. And the Team Zhao bamboo folding fans are commanding a 300% markup on the secondary market. I leaned back, steepled my fingers and sighed in pure, unadulterated capitalist bliss. Corporate social responsibility, or CSR as I like to call it, was the cornerstone of any modern brand rehabilitation. It wasn't enough to just not poison people. You had to actively contribute to the community. So I had pivoted my family's extensive textile supply chain to produce high-quality, limited edition merchandise. All proceeds were funneling directly into an urban renewal project for the capital's poorest districts. The strategy was working flawlessly. The commoners were getting new roofs, and I was getting a terrifyingly devoted fanbase. The scholars at the Imperial Academy are particularly fond of the handkerchiefs, Bu noted, an amused smile tugging at her lips. Yesterday, a group of young lords stood outside the estate gates reciting poetry about your resilient spirit and newfound gentle grace. I snorted. If by gentle grace they mean refusing to be decapitated, then sure. Send them a complimentary batch of the silver-threaded bookmark tassels. Cultivate brand loyalty early. Actually, my lady, Bu hesitated, glancing at the ledger. We don't have any bookmarks left. Or handkerchiefs. Or fans. In fact, our entire inventory for the next month was bought out by a single anonymous investor this morning. I sat up straight. A single buyer? Who has that kind of liquid capital? Did the Crown Prince try to execute a hostile takeover of my charity? No, my lady. A deep, familiar voice rumbled from the doorway. I looked up to see General Zhao leaning casually against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. He was out of his armor today, wearing simple, dark silk robes that did absolutely nothing to hide the lethal, coiled energy of his frame. General, I said, narrowing my eyes. What are you doing here? And more importantly, do you know who is monopolizing my supply chain? He didn't answer immediately. He walked into the study, his boots making no sound on the polished floors, and stopped in front of my desk. Reaching into his sleeve, he pulled out a delicate, pale pink silk handkerchief embroidered with a single white lotus. My premium, reformed Mingyu tear. He placed it gently on the desk. I stared at the handkerchief. I stared at the god of war. You? I asked, utterly baffled. You bought my entire inventory? Zhao, that was 5,000 taels of silver. Why on earth do you need 300 embroidered pink handkerchiefs and a crate of bamboo fans? Zhao's jaw twitched. He looked away, suddenly finding the calligraphy scrolls on my wall deeply fascinating. It is an investment. An investment, I repeated slowly. Yes. Your brand is appreciating in value. I am securing assets. You bought out a charity drive, General. I stood up, crossing my arms. And somehow, I don't think you plan on reselling them on the black market. Be honest with me. Did this have anything to do with the young scholars reciting poetry outside my gates yesterday? Zhao's dark eyes snapped back to mine, flashing with something intense and territorial. Those scholars are weak-kneed fools who could not lift a real sword if their lives depended on it. They have no business carrying your name in their pockets. I blinked. My breath hitched. The terrifying, unshakable commander of the Northern Army was pouting. He had initiated a massive, hostile buyout of my merchandise simply because he couldn't stand the thought of other men carrying my tokens. General Zhao, I said, fighting the massive, unprofessional smile threatening to break across my face. Are you jealous of my target demographic? I am protecting our contractual narrative, he said stiffly, though the tips of his ears were turning a faint, betraying shade of red. It is inappropriate for my fake fiancé to be the object of public affection from a bunch of ink-stained boys. Right. Protective optics. Of course. I walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. I reached out, my fingers lightly brushing the silk of his dark robes as I picked up the pink handkerchief he had placed on the table. I neatly folded it and tucked it into the lapel of his robe, right over his heart. Well, since you are my primary investor, I murmured, looking up through my lashes, I suppose you get exclusive rights to the brand. Zhao looked down at me, the air between us suddenly thick and electric. His hand came up, his large, callous fingers wrapping gently around my wrist. The fake part of our contract was rapidly disintegrating, replaced by a tension so real it could be cut with a halberd. I intend to collect on my investment, Mingyu, he whispered, his thumb stroking my pulse point. Every last tale. Chapter 8. "Bu," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I stared out the window of our private second-floor booth. "We have a leak." Down below, in the center of the bustling Drunken Crane tea house, a storyteller was energetically smacking his wooden block against a table. He had a massive crowd hanging onto his every word. And so, the storyteller bellowed dramatically, the god of war and the poisonous consort parade their affection. But ask yourselves, good people, have you ever seen them steal a kiss? Have you ever seen a lingering touch? I say to you, this is no romance. It is a political sham. A contract of convenience forged to blind the emperor. I closed my eyes and massaged my temples. A contract. The narrative was slipping. Our engagement metrics were high, but the authenticity score was tanking. In the PR world, if the public doesn't believe the narrative, the campaign is dead. And if my campaign died, my head was still legally scheduled to be separated from my shoulders in 3 months. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow evening," I ordered, turning away from the window. "We are going on a highly visible, aggressively romantic date." 24 hours later, General Zhao and I were standing on the wooden docks of the Imperial Canal, preparing to embark on a sunset boat ride. The annual Lantern Festival was in full swing, meaning half the capital was currently lining the riverbanks. I had personally art-directed the boat. Instead of the garish, bright red and gold imperial colors, I had insisted on a soft, minimalist aesthetic. The small wooden vessel was adorned with delicate blush and cream silk lanterns, their warm candles casting a gentle, cinematic glow across the water. It was designed to look intimate, ethereal, and undeniably romantic. Zhao stood on the deck, looking completely out of his element. He was wearing sweeping silver robes that made him look like a moonlit deity, but he was holding himself with the stiff, hyper-vigilant posture of a man expecting an assassination attempt. "General, relax your shoulders," I whispered under my breath, waving gracefully to a group of merchants on the shore. "You look like you're preparing to repel a boarding party." "I am not a performer, Mingyu," he muttered, though he dutifully offered me his hand to help me aboard. "I do not understand why we must float down a crowded river in a glowing wooden teacup." "Optics," I hissed softly, taking my seat on the plush velvet cushions. The tea houses are calling our relationship a political sham. We need public displays of affection. We need them to see us having a private, tender moment. Now put your arm around me. Zhao stiffened. Here? In front of everyone? Yes, here. That is the entire point of a public display. I scooted closer to him, physically grabbing his heavy, muscular arm and draping it awkwardly over my shoulders. I leaned into his side, tilting my head to find the perfect angle for the crowds on the left bank. Smile, General, I murmured, staring out at the water. Pretend I am the most precious thing in the world to you. I do not have to pretend, he said quietly. The words slipped out of him so naturally, so entirely devoid of corporate spin, that my brain short-circuited. I whipped my head around to look at him. He was already looking down at me, the soft, glowing light of the blush lanterns reflecting in his dark eyes. The guarded, glacial commander of the North was gone. In his place was a man looking at me with such raw, unfiltered intensity that it made my pulse hammer wildly in my throat. Zhao, I breathed, suddenly forgetting every single PR strategy one had ever memorized. You spend so much time managing what they see, he murmured, his thumb coming up to trace the line of my jaw, sending a shockwave of heat straight down my spine. You forget that I am the one actually looking at you. I leaned back, completely flustered. I wish it the boat is. In my panicked retreat, the heel of my embroidered slipper caught on the edge of the velvet cushion. I pitched backward, throwing my weight against the side of the small boat. The vessel violently tipped. Zhao lunged forward to catch me, his reflexes lightning fast, but momentum is a cruel mistress. His weight added to mine, and with a spectacular, highly unaesthetic splash, the god of war and the reformed villainess tumbled directly into the canal. The water was shallow, barely reaching our waists, but it was freezing. I burst to the surface, gasping for air, a lily pad plastered directly to my forehead. My pristine silk dress was ruined, clinging to me like heavy seaweed. The crowds on the riverbanks were gasping in shock. The meticulously curated, perfectly framed romantic boat ride was a total disaster. My brand was ruined. I looked over at Zhao. His hair was plastered to his face, his silver robes soaked through. He blinked the water out of his eyes, stared at the lily pad on my forehead, and did something I had never seen him do. He threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, joyous, entirely unguarded sound that echoed over the water. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. My metrics, I groaned, though a helpless smile was breaking across my own face. The optics are terrible. Forget the optics, Mingyu, he said, wading through the water toward me. The laughter faded from his face, replaced by that dangerous, magnetic pull. He didn't care about the gasping crowds or the ruined clothes. He reached out, his wet hands framing my face, gently sweeping the lily pad away. And then, right there in the middle of the Imperial Canal, illuminated by the soft cream lanterns, General Zhao kissed me. It wasn't a staged, perfectly angled kiss for an audience. It was deep, desperate, and entirely real. And as I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, I realized the terrifying truth. I didn't care about the narrative anymore either. Chapter 9. For 3 days following the canal incident, my brain operated like a server experiencing a massive DDoS attack. I couldn't focus. My metrics were a blur. Every time I tried to review the third quarter charity projections, my mind violently pivoted back to the feeling of General Zhao's hands framing my face, and the taste of canal water and sandalwood on his lips. Esteemed consort, Bu said slowly, waving a hand in front of my face. You just dipped your ink brush into your tea. I blinked, looking down at the ruined chamomile. Right. Strategy. Focus. We need to categorize the kiss, Bu. Was it a spontaneous experiential marketing event? A high-engagement publicity stunt? Or, I swallowed hard. Or was it a breach of contract? I believe, Bu said gently, taking the dripping brush from my hand. It was just a kiss, my lady. A very, very good one, judging by the fact that you haven't yelled about synergy in 72 hours. Before I could fire her for insubordination, a thunderous rumbling echoed through the estate. The floorboards vibrated. It sounded like a small army was marching directly into my plum blossom courtyard, dragging something incredibly heavy behind them. I bolted out of my study, bursting through the moon gate to find total chaos. 6 heavily muscled soldiers from the Northern Army were sweating profusely as they hauled a massive, towering object covered by a heavy canvas tarp into the center of my courtyard. Standing beside it, looking as unbothered and devastatingly handsome as ever, was General Zhao. He was dressed in his dark training robes, his arms crossed over his broad chest. When he saw me, the harsh lines of his face softened into that quiet, terrifyingly intense gaze that had been short-circuiting my brain all week. "General," I said, cautiously descending the steps. "What is the meaning of this? Is this a siege?" "No," Zhao replied, his voice a low, steady rumble. "It is a courtship gift." I froze. In the imperial court, traditional courtship gifts consisted of jade bracelets, rare orchids, or perhaps a beautifully penned poem on silk. I looked at the massive, canvas-covered monolith. It was easily 10 feet long and looked like it weighed a ton. "Zhao," I said slowly, "did you bring me a catapult?" He actually rolled his eyes. He reached out and gripped the edge of the canvas, pulling it back with one swift motion. I stopped breathing. It wasn't a catapult. It was a massive, intricately constructed woodblock printing press. It was a marvel of engineering, boasting interlocking gears, a pristine sliding tray for rice paper, and rows upon rows of perfectly carved wooden character blocks. But the most shocking part wasn't the machinery itself, it was the aesthetic. The heavy wooden frame hadn't been left raw or painted in the aggressive military reds and blacks of his army. Instead, the wood had been meticulously lacquered in soft, elegant shades of blush pink and cream, with delicate sage green vines painted along the iron levers. It was a minimalist, pastel engine of mass propaganda. "I noticed," Zhao began, clearing his throat slightly and looking everywhere but at my face, "that your current workflow for distributing your public relations announcements relies heavily on BU hand copying scrolls. It is inefficient. It creates a bottleneck in your narrative distribution." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "So," he continued, gesturing awkwardly to the massive machine, "I commissioned the military engineers. It can produce 500 flyers an hour. I told them to paint it in those soft colors you prefer, so it does not ruin the aesthetic of your courtyard." He looked back at me, his dark eyes suddenly entirely vulnerable. The god of war, a man who commanded legions and struck terror into the hearts of foreign kings, was nervously waiting to see if I liked the industrial printing press he had custom-built for my brand. He didn't know how to write poetry. He didn't know how to buy jewelry. But he knew I loved efficiency, he knew I loved controlling the narrative, and he knew my favorite colors. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me. "Zhao," I breathed, walking slowly toward the machine, running my hand over the smooth, blush-lacquered wood of the lever. "If it is not to your liking, I can have the engineers dismantle it," he said quickly, his jaw tightening. "I know it is not a traditional." "Are you kidding me?" I interrupted, spinning around to face him. I was glowing. I felt like a CEO who had just been handed a monopoly. "Zhao, this optimizes my entire operation. I can launch daily newsletters. I can control the imperial news cycle. This is the greatest return on investment I have ever seen." The tension immediately drained from his massive shoulders. A slow, incredibly smug smile spread across his face. "So you accept the gift?" "Accept it?" I practically launched myself at him. Zhao caught me effortlessly by the waist, lifting me off the ground as if I weighed nothing at all. I wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my face in his shoulder, completely overwhelmed by the scent of sandalwood and the sheer, solid warmth of him. "You are a terrible influence on my brand, General," I mumbled into his silk robes. "I'm supposed to be a hardened corporate strategist." "You are a visionary, Mingyu," he murmured, his arms tightening fiercely around me as he pressed a kiss to the top of my head. "Now tell BU to fetch the ink. You have a dynasty to rebrand." Chapter 10. The first edition of my new daily broadsheet, The Northern Star, was a massive success. Thanks to my custom-built, pastel-lacquered printing press, I was able to distribute daily updates on my charity initiatives, lifestyle tips, featuring soft-focus woodblock prints of my minimalist outfits, and glowing editorials about General Zhao's military logistics. My brand equity had never been higher. I was glowing. The capital adored me. Crown Prince Li Wei, on the other hand, was experiencing a severe case of buyer's remorse. I was taking a brief, much-needed break from reviewing circulation metrics to stroll through the imperial peony gardens. The spring air was crisp, and I was mentally calculating the ROI of launching a line of reformed Mingyu parasols when a figure stepped out from behind a weeping willow, blocking my path. "Mingyu," Crown Prince Li Wei declared, striking a pose he clearly thought looked dashing and tragic. I stopped, suppressing an eye roll. In his golden robes, he looked like a walking, talking sunk cost fallacy. "Your Highness," I said, offering a perfectly measured, deeply professional bow. How is the spiritual wellness journey going? I see your approval ratings in the eastern provinces have dipped. Have you considered a town hall? Li Wei ignored the jab. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning my face, my elegant pale green robes, and the jade hairpin holding back my hair. The original Mingyu used to cake her face in heavy powder and bright rouge to desperately hold his attention. Now, unbothered and unpainted, I apparently looked like a brand new acquisition he suddenly desperately wanted back. You have made your point, he said, his voice dropping into a register he probably used to swoon naive court ladies. This entire spectacle, the charity, the peasant clothes, the fake relationship with that brute from the north, it was all a convoluted strategy to win me back. Well, congratulations, Mingyu. It worked. I stared at him, genuinely awestruck by his audacity. Are you functionally illiterate, or do you just lack basic reading comprehension? I filed the breakup petition myself, Li Wei. A classic negotiation tactic, he scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. He took another step, invading my personal space. You wanted to make me jealous. And seeing you parade around the capital, looking so vibrant. I admit I realize what I gave up. Miss Lin is sweet, but she lacks your fire. I am willing to reinstate our betrothal. Reinstate. I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Your Highness, this is a closed account. My brand has outgrown you. Furthermore, I am currently partnered with General Zhao. Oh please, Li Wei sneered, his royal ego bruising rapidly. He reached out, his hand snapping out to grab my wrist. That uncultured attack dog. Do not insult my intelligence. He is a prop. I am the future emperor, and you belong by my side. Stop this foolish game, man. Swish. A massive, terrifying blade of cold steel dropped from the sky, embedding itself deep into the cobblestone path exactly 1 inch from the crown prince's silk-slippered foot. Li Wei shrieked, an undeniably high-pitched, undignified sound, and leaped back, dropping my wrist as if it were on fire. Standing behind him, bathed in the dappled sunlight of the willow tree, was General Zhao. He wasn't wearing his formal robes. He was in his dark leather armor, fresh from the training grounds, and he was casually leaning on the wooden shaft of a massive, lethal-looking halberd. General Zhao. Li Wei sputtered, his face flushing crimson with a mix of fury and sheer terror. What is the meaning of this? Are you attempting to assassinate the crown prince? If I were attempting to assassinate you, Your Highness, Zhao said, his voice dangerously soft and entirely devoid of the respect demanded by court protocol, you would not be standing there complaining about it. I was merely testing the balance of my weapon. It slipped. You threw a halberd at me. Li Wei punta trembling finge. In the Imperial Gardens. A clumsy mistake, Zhao agreed smoothly, his dark eyes fixed on Li Wei with the cold, predatory intensity of a tiger evaluating a very slow, very annoying rabbit. He stepped forward, effortlessly yanking the heavy halberd out of the stone with one hand. However, I must ask you to refrain from touching my fiancée. She is currently managing a delicate PR campaign, as she calls it, and sudden contact with liabilities disrupts her workflow. I choked on a laugh, quickly covering my mouth with my sleeve. The god of war was using my corporate jargon to threaten the future emperor. It was the most beautiful synergy I had ever witnessed. You forget your place, Zhao. Li Wei hissed, trying to regain his shredded dignity. She is using you. And she is welcome to, Zhao replied, stepping past the sputtering prince and placing himself firmly between us. The sheer size of his armored back completely blocked Li Wei from my view. Now run along back to your lotus pavilion, little prince. The adults are conducting business. Li Wei looked at the terrifying general, looked at the massive blade of the halberd, and wisely decided that his reacquisition strategy was a failure. He spun on his heel and stormed off, his golden robe swishing furiously behind him. Zhao watched him leave until he was completely out of sight. Then he turned to me, the lethal aura immediately dissolving. Where did you even get a halberd? I asked, gesturing to the massive weapon. I am the commander of the Northern Army, he said seamlessly, reaching out to gently massage the wrist Li Wei had grabbed. I have strategic caches everywhere. Are you all right? Never better, I beamed, leaning into his armored chest. Though I think we just severely damaged our relations with the crown. The metrics are going to take a hit. Let them, Zhao muttered, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. I will buy you another printing press. Chapter 11. I was sitting in my study, happily reviewing the Q4 key performance indicators, when the crisis hit. My approval ratings had officially hit 90%. The Northern Star was the most widely read broadsheet in the dynasty. My charity foundations were fully funded for the next decade. And my faux engagement to General Zhao had evolved into a very real, aggressively affectionate partnership that left the entire capital swooning. I was untouchable. The narrative was perfect. Then, the doors to my courtyard burst open. But you didn't just run in. She practically skidded across the mahogany floor, her face completely drained of color. She was clutching a massive, crudely printed scroll that reeked of cheap ink. "Esteemed consort," she gasped, her chest heaving. "We have a leak. A massive, catastrophic leak. I believe the term you use is cancelled." I dropped my ink brush. "Bu, calm down. What kind of leak? Did someone find out the vegan lotus pastries are actually made with lard? Because I can easily draft a retraction." "No, my lady," Bu whispered, her hands shaking as she slammed the scroll onto my desk. "It's the letters. The original letters." My blood ran cold. I unrolled the scroll. It wasn't just a rumor mill tabloid. It was a mass-reproduced collection of correspondence that the original in Mingyu had hidden in a false bottom of her armoire. Letters I hadn't even known existed. They were addressed to shadow assassins, corrupt tax officials, and rogue mercenaries. It was a masterclass in pure, unadulterated villainy. There were detailed blueprints for pushing the crown prince off his horse during a hunt. There were receipts for the embezzlement of provincial relief funds. There was even a meticulously outlined, 5-step plan to frame Miss Lin for treason using forged imperial seals. It was irrefutable, undeniable proof of everything the original Mingyu had plotted before my transmigration. "Who leaked this?" I breathed, scanning the damning evidence. "Lord Wu," Bu sniffled. "To avenge his daughter's humiliation at the tea pavilion. He found a disgruntled former servant who knew about the hidden compartment. They've distributed copies to every tea house, market, and noble estate in the capital." I walked over to the window and pushed open the wooden lattice. The sound of the capital, usually a pleasant hum of commerce, had turned into an angry, unified roar. Smoke was rising in the distance. "They are burning the reformed Mingyu merchandise in the eastern market," Bu wept. "The commoners are calling for your head. They say your charity was just a smokescreen for your treason." 5 months and 27 days. That was how long I had been in this world. My 6-month deadline was only 3 days away. The Emperor had been considering a formal pardon based on my stellar PR campaign, but with this leak, the optics were worse than a total system failure. The shadow of the Meridian Gate execution block loomed larger than ever. "Pack your bags, Bu," I said quietly. "If the Imperial Guard comes, I don't want you implicated as a co-conspirator. This brand is officially toxic." "I am not leaving you." "She is right. No one is leaving." I spun around to see General Zhao standing in the doorway. He looked terrifying. He was in full battle armor, his ceremonial sword replaced by a heavy, battle-worn broadsword at his hip. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter, and his dark eyes were burning with a lethal, unrestrained fury. "Zhao," I whispered, my carefully constructed corporate facade finally cracking. "Did you see the broadsheets? It's over. The receipts are real. I didn't write them, but my hands are tied. The brand is dead." Zhao crossed the room in 3 massive strides. He didn't look at the damning scrolls on my desk. He didn't care about the letters, the treason, or the burning merchandise. He grabbed me by the shoulders, his thumbs pressing fiercely into my collarbones, grounding me in the terrifying whirlwind of the crisis. "The Emperor will order my execution by nightfall," I said, my voice trembling. "They will drag me to the Meridian Gate. You need to distance yourself from me immediately. Issue a statement condemning my actions. Protect your own metrics, Zhao." "To hell with the metrics," Zhao snarled, the god of war fully unleashed. "Let the Emperor issue his decree. If they want to take you to the Meridian Gate, they will have to go through the entire Northern Army to do it. I will mobilize the garrison. I will lock down the capital. I will commit treason before I let them touch a single hair on your head." I stared at him. He was entirely serious. He was willing to throw away his honor, his title, and his life to start a civil war just to keep me off the chopping block. It was the most romantic, devastatingly stupid thing I had ever heard. "No," I said, reaching up to frame his harsh, beautiful face with my hands. "I am not letting you destroy your legacy to save mine. You cannot fight a PR crisis with a broadsword, Zhao." "Then how do we fight it?" he demanded, leaning into my touch, looking at me with a desperate, fierce devotion that shattered my heart. I took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. I was Chloe, Senior Public Relations Manager. I had handled worse. We don't fight the leak. We lean into it. We execute the most terrifying strategy in the corporate playbook. Which is radical authenticity, I said, a dangerous, desperate spark lighting in my eyes. Bu. Send a message to the palace. Tell them I am not hiding. Tell the emperor I am requesting an open trial in the public square tomorrow at noon. We are going to broadcast this to the entire empire. Chapter 12. The Meridian Gate was historically reserved for imperial declarations, military triumphs, and high-profile executions. As I stood on the raised stone platform beneath the glaring noon sun, it felt distinctly like the latter. The entire capital had turned out. The plaza was a sea of angry, shouting commoners, flanked by rows of stoic imperial guards. In the opulent viewing pavilion above, the emperor sat in tense silence, flanked by a smug crown Prince Li Wei and a highly vindicated Lord Wu. At the center of the platform rested the heavy, wooden executioner's block. My 6-month deadline was officially up. And Mingyu. Lord Wu's voice boomed over the crowd, amplified by court eunuchs. You stand accused of high treason, attempted assassination, and extreme malice. We have the letters. We have the receipts. How do you plead to these catastrophic breaches of imperial law? The crowd roared, chanting for blood. I didn't cower. I didn't weep. I wore a simple, unadorned robe of pure white silk, the traditional color of mourning but also of a blank slate. I stepped forward, bypassing the wooden block, and looked directly up at the emperor, and then out at the furious sea of people. I plead guilty, I said. My voice wasn't amplified, but the sheer shock of my admission rippled through the plaza, silencing the crowd faster than any megaphone ever could. Lord Wu's jaw dropped. The crown prince half stood from his chair. Guilty. Lord Wu sputtered. You confess? You do not claim the letters are forged. They are not forged, I declared, my voice steady and carrying across the hushed square. I wrote them. Every single one of them. I plotted. I schemed. I was petty, cruel, and profoundly toxic. A collective gasp echoed through the Meridian Gate. In the history of the empire, no one had ever simply agreed with their own death warrant. But, I continued, pivoting smoothly into the most critical pitch of my life. That was 6 months ago. In the corporate, the imperial world, we call this a legacy issue. You are judging me by the metrics of a past quarter. I stand before you today not to deny who I was, but to present the data of who I have become. I turned slowly, addressing the masses. Accountability is the cornerstone of any successful rebrand. Yes, I was a tyrant. But when I realized the error of my ways, did I hide? Did I flee? No. I launched the Save the Koi initiative. I funneled thousands of tales into the lower districts. I built a printing press to democratize information. I ask you to look at my current deliverables. Words! The Crown Prince shouted from the pavilion, eager to regain control of the narrative. Charity does not erase treason. A snake cannot shed its nature just because it wears a pastel skin. The crowd began to murmur in agreement. The tide of public opinion was wavering. Radical authenticity was a massive gamble. If they didn't buy the redemption arc, I was just handing them the axe. Then the heavy rhythmic thud of armored boots echoed across the stone platform. The imperial guards tried to cross their spears, but General Zhao simply walked right through them, shoving the weapons aside as if they were made of brittle bamboo. He wasn't in his formal robes. He was in his dark, battle-scarred leather armor, but he had left his halberd and his broadsword behind. He was completely unarmed. He walked past Lord Wu, past the executioner's block, and stopped right beside me. General Zhao. The emperor finally spoke, his voice echoing with warning. Step away from the condemned. Do not tangle your honor in her crimes. Zhao didn't look at the emperor. He looked at me. His dark eyes were entirely devoid of their usual glacial chill. They were blazing with a reckless, terrifying devotion. He reached out and took my hand, lacing his fingers tightly through mine in front of the entire empire. I am not tangling my honor, your majesty. Zhao's deep, resonant voice boomed across the plaza, carrying the undeniable authority of the god of war. I am leveraging it. He turned his fierce gaze up to the imperial pavilion. And Mingyu has confessed to her past. She has claimed her debts. Now I claim her. I underwrite her risk. If she is a threat to this empire, then so am I. If she bleeds today, I bleed with her. The silence in the Meridian Gate was absolute. You could hear the wind rustling the silk banners. You would stake your life, your army, and your flawless reputation on the word of a known villainess? The emperor asked, genuinely stunned. She is not a villainess, Zhao declared, his thumb stroking the back of my trembling hand. She is the greatest strategist I have ever known. She rebuilt this city's slums, she humanized the Northern Army, and she captured my heart without a single drop of bloodshed. I guarantee her character with my life. If the court demands an execution today, they will have to execute the god of war alongside her. He dropped to one knee, pulling me gently down with him, our joined hands resting on the cold stone. It was a gesture of absolute surrender to the law, but simultaneously the ultimate act of defiance. The public melted. A woman in the front row, the same auntie who had clutched a cabbage at my very first press conference, burst into loud, dramatic tears. She built our new roof, she wailed. And look how he loves her. True love has purified her soul. Within seconds, the entire plaza erupted. But they weren't chanting for blood anymore. They were weeping. They were cheering for the tragic, beautiful romance of the reformed villainess and the stoic general who believed in her. The authenticity had worked. The narrative hadn't just shifted, it had transcended. In the pavilion above, the emperor looked at the weeping crowd, looked at his furious, outmaneuvered son, and then looked down at the greatest general in his dynasty, currently kneeling hand in hand with the empire's former worst nightmare. The emperor sighed, raising his hand. The heavens favor a true redemption, the emperor proclaimed loudly. And the court cannot afford to lose its best commander over old ledgers. The execution is cancelled. Lady An is officially pardoned. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers. Zhao let out a shaky breath, closing his eyes for a fraction of a second before turning to look at me. A slow, overwhelmingly beautiful smile broke across his face. Optics successfully managed, Consortin, he murmured. Forget the optics, I laughed, throwing my arms around his neck right there on the execution platform. The PR campaign is over, Zhao. We just won. Chapter 13. Bu, please stop weeping on the silk. It leaves watermarks, and these are premium textiles. I carefully folded the last of my pastel robes and placed them into the heavy cedar trunk. The Plum Blossom courtyard was eerily quiet. It had been 3 days since the Meridian Gate incident. The official imperial decree of my absolute pardon had been delivered, framed, and hung in the entryway. My approval ratings were essentially untouchable. The crisis management campaign was officially over. I had survived. And according to the meticulously drafted bamboo scroll currently sitting on my desk, my 6-month contract with General Zhao was officially expired. I do not understand, esteemed consort, Bu sobbed, wiping her nose with a reformed Mingyu handkerchief. The emperor pardoned you. The people love you. General Zhao literally offered his life for yours. Why are we packing for your family's remote southern estate? I sighed, sitting on the edge of the trunk. Because Bu, I am a professional. General Zhao executed the most brilliant, high-stakes PR bluff in the history of the dynasty. He leveraged his entire reputation to save my life, and it worked. But I cannot hold him to a battlefield improvisation. He is the god of war. He shouldn't be permanently anchored to a former villainess just because the optics demanded it. I am giving him an out. A clean corporate exit. I ignored the sharp, painful twisting in my chest. It was just the adrenaline crashing, I told myself. It definitely wasn't the agonizing realization that I was deeply, irrevocably in love with a terrifying military commander, and that leaving him felt like liquidating my most valuable asset. Have the porters load the carriage, I ordered, standing up and smoothing my skirts. And send a messenger to the Northern Army encampment with my final performance review. I gave him 5 stars across the board. An hour later, I was sitting in the heavily lacquered carriage, the wheels crunching against the gravel of the estate's driveway. I closed my eyes, preparing myself for a long, quiet life of managing rural supply chains. Thud. The carriage lurched to a violent halt. Outside, the driver let out a startled yell, followed by the frantic whinnying of horses. I threw open the carriage window, fully prepared to negotiate with a bandit cartel, only to freeze entirely. Standing in the middle of the road, completely blocking the path of my carriage, was a massive, pitch-black warhorse. Sitting atop it was General Zhao. He wasn't in his formal robes or his training gear. He was in full, terrifying northern armor, looking like an absolute demon of the battlefield. He swung down from the saddle with a heavy metallic clank, his dark eyes fixed on my carriage window with a lethal intensity. "General," I squeaked, my corporate composure vanishing instantly. I scrambled out of the carriage door, nearly tripping over my own skirts. What is the meaning of this? If this is an exit interview, it is highly unconventional. Zhao marched toward me, his heavy boots kicking up dust. He reached into his armored breastplate and pulled out a familiar, tightly rolled bamboo scroll. Our contract. Clause 4, subsection B, Zhao rumbled, his voice dark and dangerous as he stopped mere inches from me. State the clause, Mingyu. I swallowed hard, looking up at his furious, beautiful face. Upon the 6-month mark, if the primary objective, my survival, has been achieved, the partnership will be amicably dissolved. Both parties return to their respective operations. Amicably dissolved, Zhao repeated softly. Yes, I said, my voice trembling slightly. You saved my life, Zhao. You gave me the ultimate ROI. But the campaign is over. I am stepping down so you can reclaim your unblemished legacy. You don't have to pretend anymore. Zhao stared down at me. The sheer, overwhelming force of his presence seemed to block out the sun. Pretend, he echoed, a dangerous edge creeping into his voice. You think my actions at the Meridian Gate were a strategic bluff? Weren't they? I stammered. It was brilliant narrative manipulation. Snap. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. I flinched as Zhao took the thick bamboo scroll in both of his gauntlet hands and effortlessly snapped it in half. The binding strings broke, and the wooden slats scattered across the dirt road, destroying 6 months of meticulous legal calligraphy in a single second. Zhao. The documentation. I am voiding the contract, Mingyu, he said, stepping into my space, his large hands reaching out to grip my waist, pulling me flush against his cold armor. Because I am entirely finished with temporary partnerships. My breath hitched. You are? You are a genius in the boardroom, Consortin, but you are an absolute fool if you think I would risk a civil war for optics, he murmured fiercely, his dark eyes burning into mine. I do not care about the metrics. I do not care about the brand. I care that you are running away from me, and I will not allow it. He reached into his sleeve and pulled out a small, exquisite box made of carved jade. He flipped it open with his thumb. Inside rested a heavy, magnificent ring forged of dark iron, and intertwined with delicate silver lotus vines. It was military. It was beautiful. It was a complete brand merger. I am not renewing your contract, the god of war declared, dropping to one knee right there in the dirt road, ignoring the gasping carriage driver and the frantic BU peeking out from behind the luggage. He looked up at me, his stoic mask completely gone, replaced by a raw, overwhelming love that made my eyes burn with sudden tears. I am acquiring the company, he said softly. Permanently. Marry me, Mingyu. Be my wife. Run the north with me. Let me spend the rest of my life investing in you. I stared at the iron and silver ring, and then at the terrifying, incredible man offering it to me. All of the PR jargon, the defensive strategies, and the corporate armor I had worn since I woke up in this world completely melted away. I dropped to my knees in the dirt right in front of him, ruining my premium silk skirts, and threw my arms around his neck. General, I whispered, laughing through the tears as I buried my face in his shoulder. That is the most aggressive hostile takeover I have ever seen. Do you accept the terms? He asked, his arms coming around me in a crushing, desperate embrace, burying his face in my hair. I accept, I breathed, pulling back just enough to look into his eyes. Full merger. Effective immediately. Zhao smiled, that rare, devastatingly warm smile that belonged only to me, and kissed me, officially sealing the greatest, most profitable deal of my life. Epilogue. Happily ever after, and a monopoly. 3 years later. The font on this public apology is entirely too aggressive, Lin, I said, tapping my bamboo ruler against the parchment spread across my massive cedarwood desk. This is a lord who accidentally insulted the Northern Trade Guild. He needs to look deeply remorseful, not like he's declaring a blood feud. Soften the calligraphy strokes. Use the gentle weeping willow technique we discussed. Miss Lin, the original tragic heroine of the Emperor's Radiant Lotus, furiously scribbled notes on her clipboard. Of course, Directorin, she nodded enthusiastically. She wasn't wearing trembling white silk anymore. She was dressed in a sharp, professional tailored robe of slate gray. I will pivot the narrative to emphasize his profound lack of cultural awareness, rather than his arrogance. Perhaps we can offer a 10% discount on his silk exports as a gesture of goodwill. Brilliant, I beamed, leaning back in my plush executive chair. Include that in the second paragraph. You're learning, Lin. You're going to make senior copywriter by the fourth quarter. Thank you, director, she beamed, bowing before scurrying out of my office to revise the draft. Life in the North was, to put it mildly, thriving. When General Zhao and I had officially relocated to the Northern Territory after our wedding, the region had been a stark, terrifying military stronghold. Within 3 years, I had completely rebranded it. It was now the wealthiest, most culturally vibrant, and heavily merchandised province in the empire. The commoners loved us. The soldiers were well-paid and terrifyingly loyal. And their PR was flawless. We had launched a highly successful Adopt a Wolf program for the Northern Cavalry that had sent our approval ratings through the roof. Most importantly, I had officially retired from my role as reformed villainess and launched the dynasty's first premier crisis management and public relations firm, Lotus Solutions. Our client roster was booked out for 6 months, featuring disgraced nobles, merchants facing embargoes, and occasionally, a very apologetic Crown Prince Li Wei who still didn't know how to talk to the press without putting his foot in his mouth. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open. "Are you still optimizing, Mrs. Zhao?" A deep rumbling voice asked. I looked up and smiled. General Zhao stood in the doorway, framed by the afternoon light. 3 years of marriage had not dulled his terrifying, glacial edge, at least, not when he was dealing with anyone else. To the rest of the empire, he was still the undisputed god of war. But as he walked into my office, stripping off his heavy leather gauntlets, the harsh lines of his face melted into that soft, entirely unguarded expression he reserved only for me. He walked around the desk and pressed a kiss to my temple, setting a small, intricately carved jade box on my ledger. "What is this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I was inspecting the market in the lower district," Zhao said, leaning against the edge of my desk and crossing his arms. "One of the merchants was selling a new line of wooden figures. They claim it is a limited edition." I opened the box. Inside were 2 perfectly carved, beautifully painted little wooden dolls. One was a fierce-looking warrior in dark armor wielding a halberd. The other was a lady in elegant blush and cream silk, holding a tiny, aggressive-looking scroll. I burst out laughing. "Zhao, we have action figures now." "We have merchandise," he corrected smoothly, quoting my own jargon back to me with a wicked glint in his dark eyes. "And considering the merchant was charging a 200% markup, I would say our brand equity is stronger than ever." "You didn't buy out his entire inventory again, did you?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "I exercised restraint," he lied seamlessly, pulling me up from my chair and into his arms. "I only bought the prototypes. I cannot have unauthorized vendors diluting your market share." I wrapped my arms around his neck, looking up at the terrifying, brilliant man who had saved my life and helped me build an empire. I had transmigrated into a doomed narrative, faced the executioner's block, and fought my way out using nothing but corporate strategy and a pastel color palette. But looking at Zhao, feeling the steady, absolute devotion in his embrace, I knew that the best pivot I had ever made had nothing to do with public relations. "You know, General," I murmured, leaning up to capture his lips. "Of all the acquisitions I've made in my career, you are, without a doubt, the greatest return on investment." Zhao chuckled against my mouth, his arms tightening around my waist as he pulled me closer. "Contract permanently locked, Mingyu. Now close the firm for the day. Your husband requires your undivided attention." The end. That's where this love story ends for now. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more romantic twists. Tell me in the comments what will you have done. Until the next story, keep craving romance.